The Tampa Bay Buccaneers are going to look very different this season, following the second retirement of Tom Brady. It was well known that Brady wasn't going to be the long-term solution, but the Bucs, well, they didn't care. They got a Super Bowl out of it, and now it's time to move on. There's a clear need at quarterback, and Tampa sure hopes that that hole can be filled by Baker Mayfield, who they signed this offseason. He's had a pretty fast downfall in the league since his time in Cleveland. He once showed a ton of promise and hope for the Browns, but that all really fell apart last year. In July of 2022, Baker Mayfield was traded to the Carolina Panthers for a 2024 conditional 5th-round pick. Baker competed for the starting job with Sam Darnold and was eventually named the Week 1 starter. He started the Panthers' first 5 games of the season, passing for 962 yards and 4 touchdowns to 4 interceptions, while also completing just 54.9% of his throws. In Week 5, Baker suffered a high ankle sprain and missed time. When he did return, he was the backup. Baker did start in Week 11, a 13-3 loss to the Ravens, in which he threw for 2 picks. Then, in early December, Baker Mayfield finally requested to be released, and it was granted. He ended up getting claimed by the Los Angeles Rams. Baker was the backup to John Wolford in Week 14 versus the Raiders, but Wolford only played in 1 drive before leaving due to a neck injury. Baker ended up leading a 98-yard game-winning drive with 1:45 remaining and no timeouts. He was even named Offensive Player of the Week for his performance. Baker started the last 4 games of the season and threw for 620 yards, 3 touchdowns, and had a 63.8% completion percentage. That was good enough to land another potential starting role in Tampa Bay. Now, the Buccaneers have to hope that Baker can return to his previous form. Baker Mayfield was the first overall pick to the Cleveland Browns back in 2018, and I think people forget just how much he helped change that culture. The Browns went 1-31 in the 2 years before drafting Baker, but then things immediately started turning around, and he was a big part of that. In his first season in Cleveland, the Browns were 7-8-1. He broke the rookie record with 27 passing touchdowns and threw for 3,725 yards and 14 interceptions while completing 63.8% of his passes. The Browns still had Hugh Jackson as their head coach, but Greg Williams took over as the interim in 2018. In 2019, Baker and the Browns were expected to continue to make strides, but they didn't, and a big reason for that was Freddie Kitchens. He had an awful first year as the head coach of the Browns, and Cleveland went 6-10 and Kitchens was fired. Baker also ended up having a down season, completing just 59.4% of his passes for 3,827 yards and 22 touchdowns to 21 interceptions. Luckily, everything turned back around in 2020. Cleveland hired Kevin Stefanski to be their next head coach and went on to go 11-5 and win a playoff game for the first time since 1994. Baker had the best year of his career, passing for 3,563 yards and 26 touchdowns to only 8 interceptions with a 62.8% completion percentage. It really did seem like the Browns were heading towards being a contender, but that hasn't really been the case. Cleveland had a losing record, 8-9 in 2021, and Baker struggled. He had a 60.5% completion percentage with 3,010 yards and 17 touchdowns to 13 interceptions. It was an injury-riddled season for Baker, who suffered a right knee contusion in Week 10 and then landed on injured reserve later to have surgery on a torn labrum. Now, he'll get another chance to start in Tampa Bay, but it's not going to be that easy. He's going to have to earn it in a quarterback battle against Kyle Trask. The Buccaneers used a 2nd-round pick at the 2021 draft on Kyle Trask. He was a 2-year starter at Florida despite spending 5 seasons in Gainesville. In 2020, Trask led the FBS with 43 touchdowns. He completed 68.9% of his passes for 4,283 yards and only threw 2 picks. That was enough for the Bucs to take him day 2 of the draft. The future for Tom Brady was unclear at the time, so the selection made a ton of sense, but ultimately, Brady did spend 2 more seasons in Tampa Bay. Trask did not play a single snap as a rookie and appeared in just a single game last season. He got to briefly see the field in Week 18, where Trask threw 9 passes, completing 3 for 23 yards. It's really hard to know what the Buccaneers really think about Trask. He spent the last 3 years buried on the depth chart behind Tom Brady and Blaine Gabbert. This offseason, Brady retired and Gabbert signed with the Chiefs. Kyle Trask will finally have a real chance to compete for the starting job, but Baker Mayfield is the projected guy. high. His one-year deal is worth up to $8.5 million for a reason. The Buccaneers also have John Wolford, who spent the last 4 seasons with the Rams after he actually played in the AAF. The strength of the Buccaneers offense is pretty clearly the wide receiver group. Mike Evans is still one of the best in the league. He now has over 1,000 yards in all 9 seasons in the pros. He's been an all-pro, doesn't really miss any time, and is well on pace to being a Hall of Famer at only 29 years old. Chris Godwin is the 2, and he's also really good. He was an all-pro back in 2019 after a career-best season. In his 6 years in the pros, Godwin has 1,000+ yards 3 times, including in each of the 2 past seasons. That leaves Russell Gage. He had 426 yards and 5 touchdowns last season, his first in Tampa Bay. The starting tight end will probably be Cade Otton. He was a 4th-round pick a year ago and had 391 yards and 2 touchdowns as a rookie. Around before Tampa took Otton, they selected running back Rachaad White. He ended up having 481 rushing yards, 290 receiving yards, and 3 touchdowns from scrimmage. The Bucs' offensive line should be good. They were a top 10 unit in the league last year, and you could argue that they'll be even better than they were late last season. Center Ryan Jensen suffered a career-threatening injury in training camp in 2022, but he should be back. Tristan Wirfs is a staple at left tackle, but he has had some ankle injuries recently. Wirfs has been named an All-Pro in each of the past 2 seasons. He's only 24 years old, and for the most part, the Buccaneers line is young. On the other side of Wirfs is Luke Gedeke, a 2nd-round pick last season. He started in 7 games as a rookie, and now the Bucs have to hope he can make a big jump this year. Tampa will also need guard Cody Mauch to play well. They just used a 1st-rounder on him after his time at North Dakota State, where he was an All-American for the past 2 seasons. I have to imagine that drafting Mauch had something to do with the Buccaneers trading Shaq Mason to the Texans in March. The Buccaneers' chances to make the postseason in 2023 are very much alive. Lucky for them, the NFC South is quite possibly the worst division in football. Tampa Bay won it last year despite having a losing record, and the question now is, how much better will it be this season? All 3 of the Bucs' division foes went 7-10 in 2022. The Panthers just drafted Bryce Young with the 1st overall pick and have a brand new head coach in Frank Reich. The Saints went out and signed Derek Carr to be their new quarterback. That leaves the Falcons, who have some fun offensive weapons, but an overall bad roster and a mystery at quarterback with Desmond Ridder. I highly doubt the Buccaneers will be able to make any noise come playoff time, but they could definitely be there. I don't think anyone has very high expectations for a Baker Mayfield-led Buccaneers team. Tampa Bay just needs to decide where they want to go from here, whether that's rebuilding or trying to just retool to compete in a bad division. Having Tom Brady was a glorious time in Bucs history, but things might get ugly in Tampa Bay going forward. At the very least, watching Baker Mayfield try to revive his career will be interesting to watch. He has a lot to prove, and he's shown in the past that he can succeed in the right system. Now, I don't know if that's going to be the case under Todd Bowles and new offensive coordinator Dave Canales, but it would be cool to see. Next season could be exciting for the Bucs, but I wouldn't expect too much. Life after Tom Brady will be very different, and now it's up to Baker Mayfield to lead the way.